going to adjust a little bit more here so that you can see me and I'm not being overwhelmed. There we go. That's a little bit better. So I gave myself a haircut today. Yeah, I like it. It was a little short, but I like it. We are going to continue reading today, Baron Munchausin. So hello everybody who has joined me. Here in a moment, I won't be able to see any of your lovely, delightful comments because I will be engrossed in books. And I appreciate your patience. Last week I did not read with everything that was going on. I thought it was more appropriate to sort of abstain from creating last week. However, here we are. And hello, my lovelies. Lovely to see you. I do have the fan on. Is it too loud for you on the interweb world? I don't know if anyone can hear the fan or if it's... No? Good. Because there's no circulation, and I could have turned on the air, but, you know, I would rather turn on the fan because it's cheaper. You know, adulting, that's what I do. Sometimes. So, without any further ado, my beautiful friends, we are going to continue. Oh, I want to tell you too, tomorrow we have another video coming out. It's a ghost story. I think you're going to like it. It's a personal ghost story. We're going to start branching out into ghost stories that are a little bit more well-known a little bit later on. But right now, that's what we have. So, my darlings, we are on chapter 28. And now, most noble Baron, said the illustrious Hilario Frosticos, now is the time to make this people proceed in any business that we find convenient. Take them at this present firmament of the mind, let them not think, but at once set them to work. In short, the whole nation went heartily to the business to build an edifice such as was never seen in any other country. I took care to supply them with their favourite kava and fudge, and they worked like horses. The Tower of Babylon, which, according to Hermogastricus, was 7 miles high, or the Chinese wall, was a mere trifle in comparison to the stupendous edifice which was completed in a very short space of time. It was an immense height, far beyond any that had ever been before erected, and of such gentle ascent that a regiment of cavalry with a train of cannon could ascend with perfect ease and facility. It seemed like a rainbow in the heavens, the base of which appeared to rise in the centre of Africa, and the other extremity seemed to stoop into Great Britain. A most noble bridge indeed, and a piece of masonry that has outdone Sir Christopher Wren. Wonderful must it have been to form so tremendous an ark, especially as the artists had certain difficulties to labour against, which they could not have in the formation of any other arch in the world. I mean, the attraction of the moon and planets, because the arch was so great a height, and in some parts so elongated from the earth, as in great measure to diminish in the gravitation to the centre of our globe, or rather, seemed more easily operated upon by the attraction of the planets, so that the stones of the arch, one would think, at certain times were ready to fall up to the moon, and at other times to fall down to the earth. But as the former was more to be dreaded, I secured stability to the fabric of a very curious contrivance. I ordered the architects to get the heads of some 100 numbskulls and blockheads, and fix them to the interior surface of the arch, at certain intervals, all the whole length, by which means the arch was held together firm, and its inclination to the earth eternally established, because of all the things in the world, the skulls of these kind of animals have strange facility of tending to the centre of the earth. The building being completed, I caused an inscription to be engraved in the most magnificent style upon the summit of the arch, in letters so great and luminous that all vessels sailing to the east or to the West Indies might read them distinct in the heavens, like the motto of Constantine: Cardal, Bagarlan, Kai Ton, Faringo, Sargol, Ramov, Parsol, Vantec, Kalkon, Kalintos, Rona, Thilnat, Agastra, Sadingal, Fano. Now that is to say, as long as this arch and bond of union shall exist, so long shall the people be happy, nor can all the power of the world affect them, unless the moon, advancing from her usual sphere, should so much attract the skulls as the cause of a sudden elevation, on which the whole will fall into most horrible confusion. An easy intercourse being thus established between Great Britain and the centre of Africa, numbers travelled continually to and from both countries, and at my request mail coaches were ordered to run on the bridge between both empires. After some time, having settled the government perfectly to my satisfaction, I requested permission to resign, as a great cabal had been excited against me in England. I therefore received my letters of recall and prepared to return to jolly old England. In fine, I set out upon my journey, covered with applause and the general admiration. I proceeded with the same retinue that I had before, Sphinx, Gog and Magog, and etc., and advanced along the bridge, lined on each side with rows of trees adorned with festoons of various flowers, and illuminated with coloured lights. We advanced at a great rate along the bridge, which was so very extensive that we could scarce perceive the ascent, but proceeded insensibly until we arrived on the centre of the arch. The view from thence was glorious beyond conception. 'Twas divine to look down on the kingdoms and the seas and the islands under us. Africa seemed in general of a tawny brownish colour, burnt up by the sun. Spain seemed more inclining to a yellow on account of some fields of corn scattered over the kingdom. France appeared more inclining to a bright straw-coloured intermixed with green, and England appeared covered with the most beautiful verdure. I admired the appearance of the Baltic Sea, which evidently seemed to have been introduced between those countries by the sudden splitting of the land, and that originally Sweden was united to the western coast of Denmark. In short, the whole interstice of the Gulf of Finland had no being until these countries, by mutual consent, separated from one another. Such were philosophical meditations as I advanced, when I observed a man in armour with tremendous spear or lance, and mounted upon the steed, advancing against me. I soon discovered, by a telescope, that it could be no other than Don Quixote, and promised myself much amusement in the re-encounter. Chapter 29th. "What art thou?" exclaimed Don Quixote on his potent steed. "Who art thou? Speak, or by the eternal vengeance of mine arm, thy whole machinery shall perish at the sound of my trumpet." Astonished at so rude a salutation, the great Sphinx stopped short, girdling up herself, drew in her head like a snail, when it touches something it does not like. The bulls set up a horrid bellowing, the crickets sounded an alarm, and Gog and Magog advanced before the rest. One of these powerful brothers had in his hand a great pole, to the extremity of which was fastened to a cord of about 2 feet in length, and to the end of the cord was fastened a ball of iron, with spikes shooting from it like the rays of a star. With this weapon he prepared to encounter, and advancing, thus he spoke: "Audacious wight, that thus in complete steel arrayed doth dare to venture cross my way. to stop the great Munchausin. Know then, proud knight, that thou shalt instant perish neath my potent arm. When Quixote, Mancha's knight, responded firm, gigantic monster, leader of witches, crickets, and chimeras dire, know thou that here before yon azure heaven, the cause of truth, of valour, and of faith right pure shall ordeal counter-try it. Thus he spoke, and brandishing his mighty spear, would instant prodigies sublime performed, had not some white placed neath the tail of the dark rosenate firs all thorny base, at which quadrupanting plunged the steed, and instant on the earth the knight roared credo for his life. At that same moment 10,000 frogs started from the Moronius of Gog and Magog, and furiously assailed the knight on every side. In vain he roared and invoked fair Dulcinea del Toboso, for frogs while croaking seemed more loud, more sonorous than all of the invocations. And thus in battle while the knight was overcome, and spawn all swarmed upon his glittering helmet. Detested miscreants, roared the knight. Avaunt, enchanteur, dire and goblins, could alone this odorous task perform. To rout the knight of Mancha, foul defeat in war even such as ne'er was before seen. Then hear, O del Toboso, hear my vows, that thus in anguish of my soul I urge midst frogs, Gridalbin, Hecaton, Kai, Talon, and the Rove. For such of the names and the definitions of their qualities, their separate powers. For Merlin plumed their airy flight, and then in watery moonbeam dyed his rod eccentric. At the touch 10,000 frogs, strange metamorphosed, croaked even thus. And here they come on high behest to vilify the knight, and Eris defend famed virginity, and matrons all be wronged, and pilgrims whore, and courteous guise of all. But the age of chivalry is gone, and the glory of Europe is extinguished forever. He spake, and sudden good Lord Whittington, at head of all of his rarest show, came forth armour antique of chivalry, and helmets of old, and troops, all streamers, flags, and banners, glittering gay, red and gold and purple, and in every hand a square of gingerbread, all gilded nice, was brandished awful. At a word, 10,000 Naples biscuit buns, and flannel cakes and hats of gingerbread, encountered in mid-air, in glorious exaltation, like homage, huge storm, like some huge storm of millstones, or when it rains, whole clouds of dogs and cats. The frogs, astonished, thunderstruck, forgot their notes and music, that before had seemed so terrible, and drowned the cries of knight renown, and mute in wonder heard the words of Whittington pronouncing solemn, goblins, chimeras dire, or frogs, or whate'er enchantment thus presents in antique shape, attend and hear the words of peace. And thou, good herald, read aloud the riot act. He ceased, and dismal was the tone that softly breathed from all of the frogs in chorus, who quick and petrified with fright, unless redoubted Gog and Magog, both with poles high-topped with airy bladders, by string dependent, had not stormed against his lordship. Ever and anon the bladders, loud resounding on his chaps, proclaimed their fury against all potent law, coercive morality. When he, submissive thus in cunning guile, addressed the knight's assailant, Gog, Magog, renowned and famous, what, my sons, shall you assail? Your father, friend, and chief confessed? Shall you thus, armed with bladders vile, attack my title, eminence, and pomp sublime? Subside, vile discord, and again return to your true allegiance. Think, my friends, how oft your gorgeous pouch I've crammed, all calplash, green fat, and calipay. Remember how you feasted, stood inert for ages, until size immense you've gained. And think how different is the service of Munchausin, where you o'er the seas cold, briny float along the tide, eternal toiling like the slaves Algiers and Tripoli, and on high balloon like, through the heavens have journeyed late, upon a rainbow or some awful bridge stretched eminent, as if on earth he had not work sufficient to distress your potent servitudes, but he should also seek in heaven dire cause of labour. Recollect, my friends, even why or wherefore should you thus assail your lawful magistrate, or why desert his livery? For what or wherefore serve this German lord Munchausin, who for all of your labours shall alone bestow some fudge and heroic blows in war, then cease, and thus in amity return to friendship, aldermanic, bungy brown, and sober. Ceased he then right worshipful, when both the warring champions instant stemmed their battle, and in sign of peace and unity returning, neath their feet reclined their weapons. Sudden at the signal either stamped his foot, sinistrine, and the loud report of the bursten bladder stunned each ear surrounding, like the roar of thunder from on high convulsing heaven and earth. 'Twas now upon the saddle once again the knight of Mancha rose, and in his hand far balancing his lance, full tilt against the troops of bulls opposing ran. And thou, shrill, chill, trill, kill, rill, krilly, trill, krill, I don't know what that is. Than whom no cricket e'er on hob of rural cottage or chimney black more gladsome turned his merry note, e'en thou didst perish, shrieking gave the ghost in empty air the sport of every wind. For e'en the heart so jocund and so gay was pierced harsh-spirited by the lance of Mancha, while undaunted thou didst sit between the horns that crowned Mamowski, and now Whittington advanced midst armour antique, and the powers of Magog and Gog, and with his rod enchanting, touched the head of every frog, long mute and thunderstruck, at which, in universal chorus and salute, they sung blithe, joined, and amain advanced rebellious against my troop. While Sphinx, though great, gigantic, seemed instinctive, base, and cowardly, and at the sight of storming gingerbread and the powers of Magog and Gog and Quixote all against her, started fierce returning boat, balloons and all. Loud roared the bulls, hideous, and the crash of wheels and the chaos of the confusion drear, resound far from the earth to heaven, and still more fierce in charge of the great Lord Whittington, from Poke of Ermin, his famed Grimalkin took. She screamed, and harsh attacked my bulls confounded, lightning-like she darted, and from half the troop their eyes devouring tore. Nor could the riders' crickets, thrown sublime, escape from the rage, from fury less averse than cannon's murder o'er the stormy sea. The great Mamowski roared amain and plunged in anguish, shunning every dart of fire-eyed, fierce Grimalkin. Dire the rage of the warfare, and contending crickets, Quixote and the great Magog, when Whittington advancing, good, my friends and warriors, headlong on the foe of the beard, down impetuous. Oh, I thought you had motioned.
I was drinking tea.
He spoke, and waving high the mighty rod, tipped wonderful each bull, at which more fierce the creatures bellowed, while enchantment drear devoured their victuals. And all had gone to wreck in more than mortal strife, and less, like Neptune, orient from the stormy deep. I rose in towering o'er the ruins of my fighting troops, serene and calm I stood, and gazed around undaunted, nor did aught oppose against my foes impetuous. But sudden from the chariot purses plentiful of fudge poured forth, and scattered it amain o'er all the crowd contending, as when old Catherine or the careful Joan doth scatter to the chickens bits of bread and crumbs fragmented. While rejoiced, they gobble fast the proffered scraps in general plenty and fraternal peace. And hush, she cries, hush, hush. Chapter 30th. Having arrived in England once more, the greatest rejoicings were made for my return. The whole city seemed one general blaze of illumination, and the Colossus of Rhodes, hearing of my astonishing feats, came on purpose to England to congratulate me on such an unparalleled achievement. But above all other rejoicings on my return, the musical oratio and song of triumph were magnificent in the extreme. Gog and Magog were ordered to take the maiden tower of Windsor, and make a tambourine, or great drum of it. For this purpose they extended an elephant's hide, tanned and prepared for the design across the summit of the tower, a parapet to parapet, so that the proportion this extended elephant's hide was to the whole of the castle, what the parchment is to the drum, in such a manner that the whole became one great instrument of war. To correspond with this Colossus took Guildhall and Westminster Abbey, and turning the foundations toward the heavens, so that the roofs of the edifices were upon the ground, he strung them across with brass and steel wire from side to side, and thus, when strung, they had the appearance of most noble dulcimers. He then took the great dome of St. Paul's, rising it off the earth with much facility, as you would a decanter of claret, and when once risen up, it had the appearance of a quart bottle. Colossus instantly, with his teeth, cracked off the superior part of the cupola, and then applying his lips to the instrument, began to sound it like a trumpet. 'Twas martial beyond description. Tantra tara ta. During the concert, I walked in the park with Lady Fragentina. She was dressed that morning in a chemise de Lyon. I like, said she, the dew of the mornings. 'Tis delicate and ethereal, and, by thus bespangling me, I think it will more approximate me to the nature of the rose, for her looks were like Aurora. And to confirm the vermilion, I shall go to Spa, and drink of Powhon Spring, added I, gazing at her from top to toe. Yes, replied the lovely Fragentina, with all my heart. 'Tis the drink of sweetness and delicacy. Never were there any creatures like the water drinkers at Spa. They seem like so many thirsty blossoms on the peach tree that suck up the shower and the scorching heat. There is a certain something in the waters that gives vigor to the whole frame and expands every heart with rapture and benevolence. They drink, good gods, how they do drink, and then how they sleep. Pray, my dear Baron, were you ever at the falls of Niagara? Yes, dear lady, replied I, surprised at such a strange association of ideas. I have been many years ago at the falls of Niagara, and found no more difficulty in swimming up and down the cataracts than I should to move a minuet. At that moment she dropped her nosegay. Ah, said she, as I presented it to her, there is no great variety in the polyanthuses. I do assure you, my dear Baron, that there is a taste in the selection of flowers as well as everything else. And were I a girl of 16, I should wear some rosebuds in my bosom. But at 25, I think 'twould be more apropos to wear a full-blown rose, quite ripe, and ready to drop off the stalk for want of being pulled. Hi-ho! But pray, my lady, said I, how do you like the concert? Alas, said she languishingly, while she laid her hand upon my shoulder. What are these bodiless sounds and vibrations to me? And yet, what an exquisite sweetness in the songs of the northern part of their island. Thou art gone away from me, Mary. How pathetic and divine the little airs of Scotland and the Hebrides. But never, never can I think of that same Dr. Johnson, that constable, as Fergus MacLeod calls him. But I have an idea of a great brown full-bottomed wig and a hogshead of a porter. Oh, 'twas base to be treated everywhere with politeness and hospitality, and in return invidiously and smell fungus them all over. To go to the country of Kate of Aberdeen, and of old Robin Gray, midst rural innocence and sweetness, take up their plaids and dance. Oh, doctor, doctor! And what would you say, Fradrentina, if you were to write a tour to the Hebrides? Peace to the heroes, replied she, in delicate and theatrical tone. Peace to the heroes who sleep in the Isle of Iona, the sons of the wave and the chiefs of the dark brown shield. The tear of the sympathizing stranger is scattered by the wind over the hoary stones as they meditated sorrowfully on the times of old. Such could I say, sitting upon the druidical heap of tumulus. The fact is this: there is right and wrong handle to everything, and there is more pleasure in thinking with pure nobility of heart than the illiberal inanities of sarcasm of a blackguard. Chapter 31st. The contention between Gog and Magog, and Sphinx and Hilario Frosticos, the Lord Winnington, and etc., etc., was productive of infinite litigation. All the lawyers of the kingdom were employed to render the affair as complex and gloriously uncertain as possible, and, in fine, the whole nation became interested, and were divided on both sides of the question. Colossus took the part of Sphinx, and the affair was at length submitted to the decision of the Grand Council in the Great Hall, adorned with seats on every side in the form of an amphitheatre. The assembly appeared the most magnificent and splendid of the world. A court or jury of 100 matrons occupied the principal and most honourable part of the amphitheatre. They were dressed in flowing robes of sky-blue velvet, adorned with festoons of brilliants and diamond stars, grave and sedate-looking matrons, all in uniform with spectacles upon their noses, and opposite to those were placed 100 judges with curly white wigs flowing down on each side of them to their very feet, so that Solomon in all of his glory was not so wise in appearance. At the ardent request of the whole empire, I condescended to be the president of the court, and being arrayed accordingly, I took my seat before a canopy erected in the centre. Before every judge was placed a square inkstand containing a gallon of ink and pens of proportionable size, and also right before him an enormous folio so large as to serve for a table and a book that at the same time. But they did not make such use of their pens and ink, except to blot and daub the paper, for that they should be more impartial. I had ordered that none but the blind should be honoured with employment, so that when they attempted to write anything, they uniformly dipped their pens into the machine containing sand, and having scrawled over a page, as they thought, desiring to dry it with sand, would spill half a gallon of ink. Upon the paper, and thereby daubing their fingers, would transfer the ink to their face, whenever they leaned upon their hand for greater gravity. As to the matrons, to prevent an eternal prattle that would drown all manner of intelligibility, I found it absolutely necessary to sew up their mouths, so that between the blind judges and the dumb matrons, methought the trial had a chance of being terminated sooner than it otherwise would. The matrons insisted of their tongues. The matrons, instead of their tongues, had other instruments to convey their ideas. Each of them had 3 quizzes, one quiz pendant from the string that sewed up their mouth, and another quiz in either hand. When she wished to express a negative, she darted and recoiled the quizzes in her right and left hand. When she desired to express her affirmative, she, nodding, made the quiz pendant. From her mouth flowed down from recoil again. The trial proceeded in this manner for a long time, to the admiration of the whole empire, when at length I thought proper to send my old friend and ally, Prester John, entreating him to forward to me one of the species of the wild and curious birds found in his kingdom, called woo-woo. This creature was brought over the great bridge before mentioned, from the interior of Africa by balloon. The balloon was placed upon the bridge, extending over the parapets on each side, with great wings or oars to assist its velocity, and under the balloon was placed pendant, a kind of boat, in which were the persons to manage the steerage of the machine and to protect woo-woo. This oracular bird, arriving in England, instantly darted through one of the windows of the great hall, and perched upon the canopy in the centre. To the admiration of all present, her cackling appeared quite prophetic and oracular, and the first question proposed to her by the unanimous consent of the matrons and the judges was, whether or not the moon was composed of green cheese. The solution of this question was deemed absolutely necessary before they could proceed further on the trial. Woo-woo seemed to figure not very much differing from a swan, except the neck was not near so long, and she stood after an admirable fashion like a vestris. She began cackling most sonorously, and the whole assembly agreed that it was absolutely necessary to catch her, and having her in their immediate possession, nothing more would be requisite for the termination of this litigated affair. For this purpose, the whole house rose up to catch her, and approached in tumult, the judges brandishing their pens and shaking their big wigs, and the matrons quizzing as much as possible in every direction, which very much startled Woo-woo, who, clapping her wings, instantly flew out of the hall. The assembly began to proceed after her in order and style of precedence, together with my whole train of Gog and Magog and Sphinx, Hilario Frosticos, Queen Mab's chariot, and bulls and crickets, etc., 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 preceded by bands of music, while Woo-woo, descending on the earth, ran like an ostrich before the troop, cackling all the way. Thinking suddenly to catch this ferocious animal, the judges and matrons would suddenly quicken their pace, but the creature would also quickly outrun them, or sometimes fly away for many miles altogether, and then alight to take a breath until we came within sight of her once again. Our train journeyed over a most prodigious tract of country, in a direct line over hills and dales, to the summit of Plinlimmon, where we thought to have seized Woo-woo, but she instantly took flight, and never ceased until she arrived at the mouth of the Potomac River in Virginia. Our company immediately embarked in the machines before described in which they journeyed into Africa, and after a few days sail arrived in North America. We met with nothing curious on our voyage except a floating island containing some very delightful villages inhabited by a few whites and a few people of color. The sugar-cane did not thrive there well on account, as I was informed, of the variety of the climates, the island being sometimes driven up as far as the North Pole, and at other times wafted under the equinoctial. The pity to the poor islanders, I got a huge stake of iron, and driving it through the centre of the island, fastened it to the rocks and mud at the bottom of the sea, since which time the island has become stationary, and is well known at present by the name of St. Christopher's, and there is not an island in the world more secure. Arriving in North America, we were received by the President of the United States with every honor and politeness. He was pleased to give us all the information possible relative to the woods and immense regions of America, and ordered troops of different tribes of Esquimaux to guide us through the forest in pursuit of the woo-woo, who, we at length found, had taken refuge in the centre of a morass. The inhabitants of the country, who loved hunting, were much delighted to behold the manner in which we attempted to seize upon woo-woo. The chase was noble and uncommon. I determined to surround the animal on every side, and for this purpose ordered the judges and matrons and the surrounded morass with nets extending a mile in height. The morass, with nets extending a mile in height on various parts, of which the company disposed themselves, floating in the air like so many spiders upon their cobwebs. Magog, at my command, put on a kind of armour that he had carried with him for that exact purpose. Corselet of steel, with the gauntlets, helmets, and etc., 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 as nearly to resemble a mole. He instantly plunged into the earth, making way with his sharp steel headpiece, and tearing up the ground with his iron claws, and found not much difficulty therein. As for morass, in general, is a soft and yielding texture. Thus he hoped to undermine woo-woo, and suddenly rising, seize her by the foot, while Brother Gog, ascending in the air in a balloon, hoping to catch her if she could escape Magog. Thus the animal was surrounded on every side, and at first was very much terrified, knowing not which way she had best to go. At length, hearing an obscure noise underground, woo-woo took flight before Magog could have time to catch her by the foot. She flew to the right, then to the left, north, east, west, and south, but found on every side the company prepared upon their nets. At length she flew right up, soaring at the most astonishing rate towards the sun, while the company on every side set up the general acclamation, but Gog and his balloon soon stopped woo-woo in the midst of her career, and snared her in a net, the cords of which he continued to hold in his hand. Woo-woo did not totally lose her presence of mind, but after a little consideration made several violent darts against the volume of the balloon, so fierce as at length to tear upon the great space of which the inflammable air rushing out. The whole apparatus began to tumble to earth with amazing rapidity. Gog himself was thrown out of the vehicle, and letting go of the reins of the net, woo-woo got liberty once again, and flew out of sight in an instant. Gog had been above a mile elevated from the earth when he began to fall, and as he advanced the rapidity increased, so that he went like a ball from a cannon into the morass, and his nose striking against one of the iron-capped hands of his brother Magog. Just then rising from the depths, he began to bleed violently, and, but for the softness of the morass, would have lost his life. How long have we been going? 38 minutes? I think we can go a little bit longer. I think so. Are you enjoying it? Should we go one more? I think so. I didn't get an answer, but we're going to, so here we go. Chapter 32nd. My friends, and very learned and profound judiciary, said I, be not disheartened that the woo-woo has escaped from you at present. Persevere, and we shall yet succeed. You should never despair, Munchausin being your general, and therefore be brave. Be courageous, be courageous, and fortune shall second your endeavours. Let us advance undaunted in pursuit, and follow the fierce woo-woo, even 3 times around the globe until we entrap her. My words filled them with confidence and valour, and they unanimously agreed to continue the chase. We penetrated the frightful deserts and the gloomy woods of America, beyond the source of Ohio, through the countries utterly unknown before. I frequently took the diversion of shooting in the woods, and one day that I happened with 3 attendants to wander far from our troop. We were suddenly set upon by a number of, it says savages, but he means natives. It was 200 and some years ago, so things were slightly different. As we had expended our powder and shot, and happened to have no sidearms, it was in vain to make any resistance against hundreds of enemies. In short, they bound us, and made us walk before them to a gloomy cavern in a rock, where they feasted upon what game they had killed, but which not being sufficient, they took my 3 unfortunate companions and myself, and they scalped us. The pain of losing one's flesh from my head was most horrible. It made me leap in agonies and roar like a bull. They then tied us to stakes, and making great fires round us, began to dance in a circle, singing with much dissertation and barbarity, and at times putting the palms of their hands to their mouths to set up the whoa, 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 as they had on that day also made the great prize of some wine and spirits belonging to our troop. These barbarians, finding it delicious and unconscious of its intoxicating quality, began to drink it in profusion, while they beheld us roasting, and in a very short time they were all completely drunk, and fell asleep round the fires. Perceiving some hopes, I used most astonishing efforts to extricate myself from the cords with which I was tied, and at length succeeded. I immediately unbound my companions, and though half roasted, they still had power enough to walk. We sought about for our flesh that had been taken off of our heads, and having found the scalps, we immediately adapted them to our bloody heads, sticking them on with a kind of glue of sovereign quality that flows from a tree in that country, and the parts united and healed in just a few hours. We took care to revenge ourselves on these natives, and with their own hatchets put every one of them to death. We then returned to our troop, who had given us up for lost, and they made great rejoicings on our return. We now proceeded in our journey through this prodigious wilderness, Gog and Magog, acting as pioneers, hewing down the trees, etc., etc., etc. A great rate was advanced. We passed over the numberless swamps and lakes and rivers, until at length we discovered a habitation at some distance. It appeared a dark and gloomy castle, surrounded by strong ramparts and a broad ditch. We called a council of war, and it was determined to send a deputation with a trumpet to the walls of the castle, and demand friendship from the governor, whoever he might be, and an account if aught he knew of Wu Wu. For this purpose, for our whole caravan, halted in the wood of Gog and Magog, reclined among the trees, that their enormous strength and size should not be discovered, and give umbrage to the lord of the castle. Our embassy approached the castle, and having demanded admittance for some time, at length the drawbridge was let down, and they were suffered to enter. As soon as they had passed through the gate, it was immediately closed after them, and on either side they perceived ranks of halberders, who made them tremble with fear. "We come," the herald proclaimed, "on the part of Hilario Frosticos, Don Quixote, Lord Whittington, and the thrice-renowned Baron Munchausin, to claim friendship from the governor of this puissant castle, to seek Wu Wu." "The most noble governor," replied an officer, "is at all times happy to entertain such travellers as pass through these immense deserts, and will esteem it an honour that the great Hilario Frosticos, Don Quixote, Lord Whittington, and the thrice-renowned Baron Munchausin enter his castle walls." In short, we entered the castle. The governor sat with all of our company to table, surrounded by his friends, of very fierce and warlike appearance. They spoke but little, and seemed very austere and reserved until the first course was served up. The dishes were brought in by a number of bears walking on their hind legs, and on every dish was a fricassee of pistols, pistol bullets, sauce of gunpowder, aqua vitae. This entertainment seemed rather indigestible by even an ostrich's stomach, when the governor addressed us and informed me that it was ever his custom to strangers to offer them for the first course a service similar to that before us, and if they were inclined to accept the invitation, he would fight them as much as they pleased. But if they could not relish the pistols, bullets, and etc., 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 he would conclude them peaceable, and try what better politeness he could show them in his castle. In short, the first course being removed untouched, we dined, and after dinner the governor forced the company to push the bottle about with alacrity and excess. He informed us that he was the Nerskin Roskimaumowski, who had retired amid these wilds, disgusted with the court of Petersburg. I was rejoiced to meet him. I recollected my old friend, whom I had known at the court of Russia, when I rejected the hand of the empress. The Nerskin, with all of his knights companion, drank to an astonishing degree. It'll be a moment. I'm going to finish this chapter. Degree, and we all set a hobby horse and full cry out of the castle. Never was there such a cavalcade before. In front of the galloped 100 knights belonging to the castle, with hunting horns and a pack of excellent dogs, and then came the Nerskin Roskimaumowski, Gog and Magog, Hilario Frosticos, and your humble servant, hallooing and shouting like so many demoniacs, and spurring our hobby horses at an infernal rate, until we arrived in the kingdom of loggerheads. The kingdom of loggerheads was wilder than any part of Siberia, and the Nerskin had built a romantic summer house in a Gothic taste, to which he would frequently retire with his company after dinner. The Nerskin had a dozen bears of enormous stature, and danced for our amusement, and their chiefs performed a minuet de la cour to admiration. And here the most noble Hilario Frosticos thought proper to ask Nerskin some intelligence about Woo-Woo, in quest of whom we had travelled over such a tract of country, and encountered so many dangerous adventures, and also invited the Nerskin Roskimaumowski to attend with us, all his bears, in the expedition. The Nerskin appeared astonished at the idea. He looked with infinite hauteur and ferocity on Hilario, and affecting a violent passion, asked him, did he imagine that the Nerskin Roskimaumowski could condensed to take notice of Woo-Woo, let her fly what way she would, or did he think a chief possessing such blood in his veins could engage in such a foreign pursuit? By the blood of all the bears in the kingdom of the loggerheads, and by the ashes, and by the great-great-grandmother, I would cut off your head. Hilario Frosticos resented this oration, and in short, a general riot commenced. The bears, together with their 100 knights, took the part of the Nerskin, and Gog and Magog, Don Quixote, the Sphinx, Lord Whittington, the bulls, the crickets, the judges, the matrons, Hilario Frosticos made noble warfare against them. I drew my sword and challenged the Nerskin to a single combat. He frowned, while his eyes sparkled fire and indignation. Embracing buckler on his left arm, he advanced against me. I made a blow at him with all my force, which he received upon his buckler, and my sword broke short. Ungenerous Nerskin, seeing me disarmed, he still pushed forward, dealing his blows upon me with the utmost violence, which I parried with my shield and hilt of my broken sword, and fought like a gamecock. An enormous bear at the same time attacked me, but I ran my hand, still retaining the hilt of my broken sword, down his throat, and tore up his tongue by the roots. I then seized his carcass by the hind legs, and whirling it over my head, gave the nareskin such a blow with his own bear as evidently stunned him. I repeated my blows, knocking the bear's head against the nareskin's head until, by one happy blow, I got his head into the bear's jaws, and the creature being still somewhat alive and convulsive, the teeth closed upon him like nutcrackers. I threw the bear from me, but the nareskin remained sprawling, unable to extricate his head from the bear's jaws, imploring for mercy. I gave the wretch his life. A lion preys not upon carcasses. At the same time, my troop had effectually routed the bears and the rest of their adversaries. I was merciful, and ordered quarter to be given. At this moment I perceived Wu Wu flying at great height through the heavens, and we instantly set out in pursuit of her, and never stopped until we arrived at Kamsatchkata. Thence we passed to Otate. I met my old acquaintance, Omai, who had been in England with the great navigator Cook, and I was glad to see he had established Sunday schools all over the islands. I talked to him of Europe and his former voyage to England. "Ah," said he, most emphatically, "the English, the cruel English, to murder me with goodness and refine upon my torture, took me to Europe, and showed me the court of England, the delicacy of exquisite life. They showed me gods and showed me heaven, as if on purpose to make me feel loss of them. For these islands we set out, attended by a fleet of canoes, with fighting stages, and the chiefest warriors of the islands, commanded by Omai. Thus the chariot of Queen Mab, my team of bulls, and the crickets, and the ark, the sphinx, and the balloons, with Hilario Frosticos, Gog, and Magog, Lord Whittington, and the Lord Mayor's show, Don Quixote, and etc., 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 with my fleet of canoes, altogether cut a very formidable appearance on our arrival at the Isthmus of Darien. Sensible of what general benefit it would be to mankind, I immediately formed a plan of cutting a canal across the isthmus from sea to sea. For this purpose, I drove my chariot with the greatest impetuosity repeatedly from shore to shore in the same track, tearing up the rocks and the earth thereby, and forming a tolerable bed for the water. Gog and Magog next advanced as the head of 1,000,000 of people with the realms of North and South America, and from Europe, and with infinite labour cleared away the earth, and etc., 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 that I had ploughed up by my chariot. And then I drove my chariot, making the canal wider and deeper, and ordered Gog and Magog to repeat their labour as before. The canal being 1/4 of a mile broad and 300 yards in depth, I thought it sufficient, and immediately let in the waters of the sea. I did imagine that from the rotary motion of the earth on its axis from west to east, the sea would be higher on the eastern than on the western coast, and that on the uniting of the two seas there would be a strong current from the east, and it happened just as I expected. The sea came in with tremendous magnificence and enlarged the bounds of the canal, so as to make passage of some miles broad from the ocean to ocean, and made an island of South America. Several sail of trading vessels and men of war sailed through the new channel to South Seas, China, and etc., etc., and saluted me with all their cannon as they passed. I looked through my telescope at the moon, and perceived the philosophers there in great commotion. They could plainly discern the alteration on the surface of our globe, and thought themselves somehow interested in the enterprise of their fellow mortals in a neighbouring planet. They seemed to think it admirable, and such little beings as we men should attempt so magnificent a performance, what would be observable even in a separate world. Thus, having wedded the Atlantic Ocean to the South Sea, I returned to England, and found Woo-Woo precisely in the very spot whence she had set out after being led us on a chase all around the world. And that, my friends, is where we leave off, chapter 23. We are nearing the end. We might have one more day of reading the Baron, and then I'll do a little. Oh yeah, that's it. We have that to go. That's the end. So we will read that next time. So the thing about this book is that it was written several hundred years ago. Things change, and it had been a while since I read this book, but I still love the Baron, even though he's a little bit of a, well, I love the Baron. Even though I don't agree with, anyway. With that, thank you so much.
Historical context is important.
Historical context is very important. I think this was, my goodness, 1790, I think is when that was written. So there's a lot of things in those hundreds of years that have changed, and rightfully so. With that, till next time, love to you. I've been your host, Richard Lale Lillard, the Gentleman Psychic. Thank you.